We started our study in the book of Daniel, and at the moment, what we have been doing so far, is we have just been looking at the historical background. Last week we looked at chapter 1, and I have one regret, which is that I didn't use more illustrations. I want to try to see if I can use illustrations, because I think whatever we are doing, the illustrations help us to visualize better. But anyway, chapter 1 is basically dealing with the history of Daniel's early experience in Babylon. We know that he took a stand. He refused to eat of the king's meat. And because of his faithfulness, we see that God blessed him and blessed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. What God did was God gave them unusual wisdom. And he gave Daniel the gift of interpreting dreams. And we see that as a result of this, they were given high positions in the government of King Nebuchadnezzar. As we look at this chapter, what we can see is there are several lessons. Probably the most outstanding lesson is how important it is to be faithful to God, even in small things. Because, to be honest, I don't know if anybody would have noticed if these young men were eating this food, all right? I think what we kind of concluded last week, I think most of us agreed that Daniel refused to eat the food, not because he was a vegetarian, not because he was trying to prove that vegetarian food is more healthy than a flesh diet. And as somebody pointed out in Daniel chapter 10, we see that later in life, Daniel was eating a flesh diet. In Daniel chapter 10 and chapter 9, Daniel goes away to fast, and he said he took no flesh and no wine for 3 weeks. So we know that it seems like it was his habit at that time to partake of flesh and wine. So there must be another reason why at this time he was willing to even risk his life to not partake of the food. And the other thing that we came to was that it was probably because he was trying to avoid eating food that had been offered to idols. Probably. But anyway, we know that he took a stand and he was faithful to this, and because of this, God honored his faith. God honored his faithfulness, and God blessed him, blessed his 3 friends who were similarly determined. And so they were given honorable positions, outstanding positions in the government of King Nebuchadnezzar. So I'll just mention one other thing that maybe we didn't highlight last week, and it is that it's so striking. There are several places in the Bible, 2 of them outstanding. One of them is the story of Joseph, and the other one is the story of Daniel. There's a verse in Psalms that says, when a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. What is outstanding for me in these instances is how these men, Joseph, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, they all were taken to these countries as the lowest kind of citizen, the lowest. Joseph went to Egypt as a slave. Daniel ended up in Babylon. Daniel and his 3 companions, they ended up in Babylon as the captives of an alien power. When you are taken captive, you're at the lowest tier of society. The lowest person in society is better off than you. This is the condition of these people when they entered these countries. And in a matter of a few years, in both cases, all of them rose to the highest possible position that they could attain to in the country. That's pretty amazing. I could compare it to me coming to America as a one of the things that Jamaica has is a prisoner, some kind of agreement with America that if you commit a crime in Jamaica that affects people in America, like, they have some scammers here, and they call old people in America and they scam them out of money. And the government has an agreement here that if if they arrest one such person here, they deport him to America for him to be punished in America. So anyway, it's kind of similar like if I were deported to America in that way and taken to America as a prisoner, I would be in the lowest possible position. And then in a few years, I am exalted to a high position in the government. It would be similar. You know how unlikely that is for somebody who is not an American for that to happen to. So it was something like that with Daniel. And I mention it because I think it is astonishing how faithfulness to God works. Because all that these men did, all that Joseph did, he was faithful to God. The first great test came when Potiphar's wife wanted him to go to bed with her. He refused. He ended up in jail. He went further into disaster. He was in prison. He did his job diligently. I mean, even as a prisoner, he did what he had to do patiently and nicely. And it made the guard favorable towards him. And he was kind towards the other prisoners in no time at all. He ended up in the highest possible position. The only way he could be higher is if he became Pharaoh himself. Same thing with Daniel. Daniel simply said, I'm not going to eat the king's meat. And God honored that little bit of faithfulness. Later on, the three other men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they refused to bow down to the golden idol. And you would think that's a death sentence. Everybody else was bowing. You would think that's a death sentence. They are prepared to die, but they are standing for God. And they end up being in a higher place because of their faithfulness. So I'm just highlighting that because, you know, sometimes we get testimonies of people who are under pressure from friends in the workplace sometimes for people who have a conviction about not working on Sabbath and they are pressured. But remember, you never can see the goodness of God. You never can see the faithfulness of God until you put God to the test. And the Lord himself says, them that honor me, I will honor. That's a promise that anybody who has put God to the test, you will testify that it has been true. I know that in my experience from the days when I was going to college, right through my life, every time I've decided to honor God, I was put in a position where there was tension, there was pressure to conform, and I stood every time. The consequences were really outstanding. I could see the hand of God. I always ended up better than before. So that's something that we can gather from the story of Daniel that we read in chapter 1 last week. Now we go on to chapter 2 this week, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so we're going to go to Daniel chapter 2. And I'll switch back and forth between what we are reading and some PowerPoint images that I have. And I mean, the images are probably irrelevant, but still at the same time, I know that looking at pictures sometimes helps to cement ideas in our minds. So I'll do that. It says in verse 1, and in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, hold on, let me go to chapter 1. It says, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. Now it says here in chapter 2, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. So what I'm going to conclude from this is that Nebuchadnezzar was reigning jointly with somebody else. If this is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, absolutely when he conquered Jerusalem, it was not the first year of his reign. So if this is the second year, what it means, and I think this is what I remember, he was reigning jointly with his father, I believe. And when it says it was the second year of his reign, it was probably the second year after he began to reign exclusively, maybe after his father died, something like that. I'm speaking off the top of my head, so Don't quote me on it, but I just see where it says the second year of his reign here. And it can't be literally the second year, because I don't think he conquered Jerusalem in the first year. He was making war against other countries and against Jerusalem for some time before that. So I have to think this was the second year of his reign when he began to reign exclusively. But let's continue. It says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Now, this is one of those verses, just in passing, this is one of the verses that I use from time to time to illustrate the point that a person's spirit is a definite part of him. Now, it doesn't say that Nebuchadnezzar, his body was troubled, okay? It specifies his spirit was troubled. And what it means is that he had a feeling, he had a feeling that made him very concerned, somehow, something about what he dreamed. One day this week, I don't remember what happened, but I had a bad day. It was a day when I remember I was supposed to do something and I didn't do it, or I did something and I didn't do it properly, something, but I know that at the end of the day I felt like, oh my, this was not a good day. The next morning I woke up and my spirit felt heavy. I just felt a low feeling. I felt like there was something bad in the air and I didn't know what. And then I remembered, yesterday I had a bad day. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, but I woke up the following morning with a low feeling. And after I identified it, I was able to come to grips with it, and my spirit changed. But I use this example because I want to explain what it means when it says his spirit was troubled. It means that you are troubled, you are touched in an area that is beyond your intellect. Yes, he had a dream, but where did it affect him? It affected him in his spirit. Because all of us have dreams sometimes. But when we have a dream that affects us on the spiritual level, it's because there is a conviction that it is more than a dream. It needs more than normal attention. Something like this happened to Nebuchadnezzar. And so it says that his spirit was troubled, and as a consequence, he couldn't sleep. There's something in his subconscious. By this time, it is also in his conscious mind. But when it says his spirit was troubled, it means that on an inner level, there's something resting on him. So, remember that we are dealing with somebody who is completely pagan, completely heathen. This person has nothing to do with the God of Israel or Jehovah. What Nebuchadnezzar goes on to do is something that we have no criticism at all of, because of the person we are dealing with. It says, then the king commanded to call the magicians. That is normal. And the astrologers. That is normal. We Christians today are appalled at this kind of spiritualistic approach. We're appalled at this kind of ignorance. But we are speaking from a vantage point of enlightenment. Nebuchadnezzar was the greatest king in the world at that time. But where spiritual things were concerned, he was woefully ignorant. So he called the magicians. That's one class of his advisors. The astrologers, that's another class. The sorcerers, that's another class. The Chaldeans, that's another class. Now, I'd like to see how these are interpreted. If you look at the NASB, the magicians are, okay, they're magicians. The astrologers are identified as the conjurers. Let me see if I can find a simpler version to figure out who these people are. Magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers. All right, this is a little closer to it. So magicians are people who are able to do supernatural tricks. Enchanters, these are the ones who use spells and cast spells. They're supposed to be in touch with the supernatural as well. Sorcerers, these are the ones who, similar astrologers, these are the ones who read the stars, supposedly. So what we're looking at is a band or a group of people who claim to be privy. They claim to have access to supernatural knowledge, knowledge beyond human capabilities. And he called them to show the king his dreams. So the king came and stood. So they came and stood before the king. Now, what happens next gives us some insight into Nebuchadnezzar's personality, his character, and the character of these advisors. So it says, and the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. I'm going to read the right panel as we go along because it's simpler reading. He says, I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means. Then the astrologers answered the king, May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it. In verse 5, it says, the king replied to the astrologers, This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. Right, I think another place it says your houses are going to be turned into a garbage heap. So, what we see here, first of all, is Nebuchadnezzar's uncompromising nature, okay? He's not going to be involved in any argument. Right away, he says right from the beginning, this is what I want from you. I have firmly decided. And the decision is, tell me the dream and interpret it. Two things, tell me the dream and interpret it. And he says straight up, if you don't do it, I'm going to have you chopped into pieces and your houses are going to be turned into a garbage heap. So it's almost like a fairy tale. You read it and you're thinking, okay, this is like a children's fairy story, off with his head and all of that. But those children's stories, those fairy tale ideas came from reality, because this was the fact of how it was 2,000 years ago. 2,600 years ago was when Daniel lived. This was how it was. The king had absolute power. We live in a world today where, well, for the most part, this kind of power doesn't exist. I suppose it exists in some places where you have, dictatorship, or you have gangs where there's absolute control from the gang leaders. So it was something like this. And the reason why Nebuchadnezzar was so draconian in what he was saying, he was uncompromising. I think the reason, and you can reason it out for yourself, the reason is that the power of the dream on his mind, it was striking, and he woke up out of his sleep convinced somebody was trying to communicate with him. From time to time, I hear people say that God talks to them. From time to time, I hear them say that they have had a dream and that God gave them a message. And one of the things that I have noticed, one of the things that I am always looking for, is the strength of that dream or of that vision. It's customary for religious people to come along and they say, I got a vision from God. I don't like when I hear people say those kinds of things, because they trivialize spiritual things. When a person has a vision, from my understanding, when I read the Bible, when a person gets a vision, it's no different from when you are wide awake. Like I'm sitting here and I can see all of you, and as I grow older, I find that I gain more control in my dreams. I'm more in control. Sometimes I'm dreaming and I'm thinking I'm probably dreaming. I don't know if it happens to you older ones. When I was a little boy, I didn't have that kind of control. when I'm dreaming, it's like I don't know what I'm doing. But nowadays, I'm aware that I might be dreaming, like I can fly, okay? I have that dream very often these days that I'm flying. And in my dream, I learn to fly. So that when I have the next dream about flying, I know what to do. But then I'm always aware that I'm dreaming. So sometimes flying feels so nice. I think I'm going to try to learn how to do this, that when I'm awake, I can do it. And so I'm trying to learn the technique. And sometimes it seems so real, I'm thinking, maybe it's real, so I'm going to look and see if it's real. I know that in a dream you can't see details, so I'm trying to find some detail that I'm going to look for to make me know that it's real. So my mind goes through this kind of convolutions when I'm dreaming these days. But a vision is not like this. And a dream from God is not like this. When you have a vision or a dream from God, based on what I see in the Bible, you don't know the difference between that and reality. Like when the angel came to Peter in the prison and struck him on his side and said, "Get up and bind on your clothes." And the angel was, as they were going through, the gates were opening and Peter was passing through. It was real. But you know what happened? Peter thought it was a vision. Peter thought it was a vision. And yet it was real. This shows me that biblical visions are so real. They're exactly like the real thing. And Nebuchadnezzar had a dream like this. This is how you can know that God has given you a dream. It is when the thing is so real, you can't tell the difference between it and real life. So that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he knew God is... He didn't know God, so he would have said, the gods. The gods are trying to speak to me. So what did he do? Of course, he did the most natural thing. He sent for the people who are supposed to be in touch with the supernatural, the sorcerers, the astrologers, the magicians. These are the people who are in my kingdom. They have been hired by my office to do this kind of job. And just to be a little facetious here, and maybe not so funny, but it's like Trump gets a dream and he sends for Paula White and the other people who are there laying hands on him. And he says, "Now I want all of you to tell me what this dream means." He would be perfectly justified because they are there claiming to be the voice of God, and God gave them this vision and this and that, and they are laying hands on him. Of course, if he has a dream and sends for them to tell him, he'll be perfectly justified. So anyway, this is even more striking because this is the job of these people, and they are in the king's palace and they are being paid to do this job. So the king makes them know from the beginning, this is your job. This is what you are being paid to do. If you cannot do this, you are going to be cut in pieces and your houses. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't an easy person. It wasn't just that he was going to kill them. Their very homes, he was going to turn it into a garbage heap. So these people were in a well-paid job, but it had its hazards. So he goes on to say, "But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." So he's asking them to do two things. It's not one thing. He's asking them, first of all, to tell the dream, and secondly, to interpret it. And in my opinion, even though Nebuchadnezzar's attitude is a little too strong for me, in my opinion, I think he's not being unreasonable. Now, it says in verse 7, "Once more they replied, 'Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it.'" So, you know, they're hedging for time. Not just hedging for time, they have a technique. These people who claim to be in touch with the supernatural, they have a technique. If you tell us the dream, they get together and they consult and they say, "Okay, there's a little baby involved here. This means such and such. He dreamed about somebody smiling. This means something," and they can make up something. Okay, Um, there are some people today who have in Jamaica, for example, they have a pattern for interpreting dreams. My mother was a Christian, but she was a little bit superstitious too. And I don't know, I don't understand. But anytime she dreamed about a naked woman, she always said it meant that somebody was going to get pregnant. And so there was a standard meaning to certain things. And I suppose these people in these astrologers, that's how they studied too. To be perfectly 100% honest with you, brothers and sisters, I don't this is some people approach the subject of God in a similar way. Okay, and it is something that I am very strongly against. There are some people who believe that you treat God like he's a formula. He operates by formulas. Okay, like if you speak the right words, God will answer. Or if you generate enough faith, you will have what you ask for. They look at the promises of Jesus. Jesus says, if you ask and you don't believe, you don't doubt, you will have what you ask for. So the key here is to ask and not to doubt. So you try to generate enough faith, and you end up focusing on the method instead of the person. And this is to completely misunderstand. And I mention it because it seems a little similar to me to how these heathen people approached the issue of dreams and supernatural things. They believe there was a formula you follow, and if you follow the formula, you will have a result. And we Christians should not fall into that same trap. The God we serve is not a formula. God is a person, and so we relate to Him in a personal, intelligent way, and not as a formula. You push the right buttons. That's how paganism operates. And so these people said to the king, "Tell us the dream, and we will produce the interpretation." All right, they wanted to know which buttons they should push, if I may put it that way. Now, if you go to verse 8, and I'm continuing to read from this. I'm actually reading from the NIV here, but I'm reading from it because I want this story to flow. The King James Version is a little archaic. If it comes to something where it needs interpretation, I'll go to the KJV. But since we are just looking at the story itself, I'm reading from the NIV. Then the king answered. Is there somebody who wanted to say something?
Karen, I just said good.
Okay. In verse 8, then the king answered, "I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." Nebuchadnezzar was not a fool, okay? I don't know. Maybe he had some past experience with these people that made him irritated with them. I find it a real challenge to understand why the one occasion, and he's so angry right from the beginning. He's upset right from the beginning. Yes, his spirit is deeply troubled, and he recognizes that he's on the verge of something great. Somebody is trying to communicate with him, and the people he's paying to do the job, they're stalling for time. I am tempted to suspect that he has had past experience with these people and their trickery, and so he's not playing. Okay, I'm tempted to believe this, but anyway, that's an opinion. That's not anything that the Bible says. That's an opinion. It's just that he's so strikingly upset from the beginning. I'm thinking there might be a history behind this. All right, but look what he says. "I can know that the meaning is true if you tell me the dream." All right, so Nebuchadnezzar is keeping the dream a secret. I think in the King James Version, it puts it a little differently. And there's a statement in the King James Version that was misleading. If you look at what it says in the King James Version, in verse 8, it says, "The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that you would gain the time, because you see that the thing is gone from me." And what that suggests is that the king is saying, look, I have forgotten. But the NIV says, "Then the king answered, I am certain that you are trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided." It's different. The King James Version says, because you see that the thing is gone from me. The NIV says, you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. It's very different. Let me see what the NASB says.
Brother David, the New King James Version have it the same way too. That my decision is firm.
The NIV, the New King James says that.
Yes, it's just like the NIV.
Okay, all right. So the NASB also says the command from me is firm. So we're going to go along with the idea that this is what Nebuchadnezzar was saying. He wasn't saying that he had forgotten the dream, because this is what I used to believe, that because of the King James Version, I believe that the king couldn't remember the dream. But it seems like what the king is saying is, look, I remember the dream, but I'm not telling you the dream. I want to make sure that you're not tricking me. Because look here, if the king had told him the dream, how would he know that the interpretation was correct? They could have said, okay, you dreamed about an image and a stone smiting the image. This means that this image is the kingdom of Persia, and you're going to destroy the kingdom of Persia. How would he know if it is true? They could make up anything and tell him. So the king is looking for this, using this opportunity to put these people to the test. If somebody really knows the answer, the secret, why wouldn't they know the dream? If there's some supernatural power that can tell them what the dream means, why wouldn't the same power tell them the dream itself? So the king is withholding the dream to make sure that he's not going to be tricked. So, but he's very stern and draconian. He's not playing at all. And so he says, if you don't do this, well, you are going to be chopped in pieces and your house is made into a dunghill. In verse 10, I see you, Sister Nikki. I'm coming to you in just a moment. Let me read the verse and then I'll come to you. The astrologers answered the king, "There is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans." Sister Nikki, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. I was just wondering if it could have been that like God deliberately allowed Nebuchadnezzar not to remember the dream, so that even when Daniel told him the dream and the interpretation, he recognized that there is something different from Daniel's approach as compared to those of the astrologers, because they were planning to make up a story. But Daniel didn't even know the dream. Nebuchadnezzar didn't remember. And when Daniel told him what the dream was and what the interpretation of it was, he recognized that there was something different about Daniel's God, who revealed to him both the dream and the interpretation, and not so much that Nebuchadnezzar remembered the dream and was like tricking his astrologers. Could that be a possibility?
It could be, but to be honest, the other interpretation seems to me to make to be more consistent with the character I see in Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so it's like he's saying, yes, I know the dream, but if I tell you the dream, how will I know that you are giving me the right interpretation? So he's being very smart. So it seems to me like he's saying, I'm not telling you the dream. Now I will be certain you can tell me the right interpretation if you tell me both the dream and then the interpretation. That seems to me like a smart move, and the kind of person Nebuchadnezzar is. I mean, it seems like this is what he would do. So the King James Version makes it seem like he's saying, I have forgotten. But as Brother Ian says, even the New King James Version says, the translation is different in the New King James Version. And why the New King James Version is significant is because it's translated from the same manuscript as the King James Version. Now, the other versions, some parts of them are from different manuscripts, but the New King James Version is the same exact manuscript. So if the New King James Version has the other translation, it means that the translation itself could be interpreted in two different ways. So the Old King James Version put it one way, and the New King James Version is more in agreement with the other translations, the way that it is translated. Go ahead, Brother Ian.
Yeah, two things there, following what you just said in relation to Nikki's question. One, the first observation I make in chapter 2 is that Nebuchadnezzar didn't see the dream once. The Bible says he had dreams, plural, and it caused him to lose sleep. That means he probably shut his eyes, fall asleep, had the dream, wake up out of the dream, went back to sleep, had the dream again, wake up out of the dream, and he could not sleep because the dream keep coming back to him. He said he had dreams. So it's not just one dream. So it is very unlikely for him to forget the dream after having seen a dream more than once. That's my first point. The next point is I forget the next point. I'll come back to it.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So the idea that it's probable that he remembered, and he deliberately chose not to reveal it to them because he wanted to put them to the test.
Yeah, I remember now. The old in King James English way of speaking to say something is a decree is sent out is to say that it's gone from me. The decree is gone from me. In other words, when he says the thing is gone from me, he's actually saying the decree is gone out. And you know that in those days, the kings, whenever a king make a decree, he doesn't take it back. It doesn't come back. And
Right. The word is gone out. The word is gone out from
the word is gone out. That is what he's trying to say. The thing is gone out. The matter is gone out.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Right. Okay. So all right, we go down to verse 11 where they are telling the king that nobody can reveal it except the gods, and they do not live among humans. That's an interesting statement because, of course, it reveals that these people, the sorcerers, the magicians, the astrologers, they are not really in communication with the gods. I mean, even though they believe in many gods, and Daniel knows there's only one God, but it's interesting that they themselves admit that their information does not come from the gods. And so it highlights the method of astrology and magic and sorcery. It's based on the idea. It's based on the idea that you can get in touch with elements that are not from God that can still give you access to divine information. So, for example, a sorcerer or a wizard, they will break an egg in a bowl of water or something like that, and they will speak a few words and they'll look in the water and whatever they see, and it will tell them the future. It's mindless stupidity, like an egg combined with water compels something to tell you something about the future. It's not based on any sense or rationale or reason, but it becomes a science, right? It's like you look at the stars, and if you see Venus lined up with Mars or some kind of stupidity tells you something will happen in your life tomorrow. There's no rationale or reason behind it, but it's what is called superstition. But it is so deeply embedded in the thinking of humanity that people have made it into a science, and people believe in it wholeheartedly. It was true in Babylon. So now they are saying that there's no king. There's no king who has asked it because only the gods know this. Our little methods can't tell you this. So they are admitting straight up that they don't have access to information from the gods. They are working with other powers that heaven knows what they are. And Brother Ken, I don't know if you want to say something. All right, Brother Ken Griffith, I think you're unmuted. Let me just mute you, okay?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so it says in verse 12, this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. Now you can see that Nebuchadnezzar is a wise man, but he's very volatile. Let me use that word. Because it says, the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. I mean, that looks so unreasonable. Okay, they were not among the people who were called. They were not there, but they commanded the death sentence. And this is where, even though Nebuchadnezzar is a wise person, he is rash and volatile, because he's so upset to think that these people I'm paying, I'm feeding, I have them in my palace, and they are worth nothing. He decides to kill all of them. It says when Arioch,
David,
yeah,
so I considering that this is in the second reign of in the second reign as full king, because prior to that he was what they call crown prince with his father. So consider this is his second reign. I know he probably put up with it, with all of this nonsense all along while his father was in power. Now he's in power, he's definitely trying to make a change where this is concerned. I'm just looking at it from that perspective.
right, interesting point, and it's probably, that's exactly probably how it was. It says, when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. And again, this, what's the name of the person Daniel was dealing with in the beginning? The Ashpenaz. Okay, he was Ashpenaz. This is another person. This is Arioch, and again, it's interesting that Daniel is able to have influence with all of these people. When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, why did the king issue such a harsh decree? Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Now, if you notice a little earlier on, the king had explicitly said in verse 8, I am certain that you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. Now, Daniel comes to him and Daniel asks him for exactly what he accused them of. Daniel goes and he asks the king for time. And it highlights the point I'm making, which is this. Why would the king give time to Daniel when he deliberately told the people that they are looking for time and he's not giving them any time? Why would he give time to Daniel? I'm telling you, there is a power in a Christian's life. There's a power in being able to look people in the eye. There's a power in being able to look people in the eye and being able to act with dignity and to be upright. I mean, you know, the most outstanding experience I've had with this. When I was a student in college, there was a rule that I mean, college in Jamaica is a little different maybe from college in America. Well, back in those days especially, we were living on campus, so you could not leave campus without permission. You were not supposed to. It happened, but you weren't supposed to, and especially a group of students going out, you were not supposed to go out in a mixed group, male and female together. Now we had a Christian fellowship that was very strong, and we wanted to go for the weekend, several weekends, to spend time at the different churches of different members of our fraternity. We were the Adventist fraternity, and we wanted to go out, and so we wanted to go in a mixed group, the men and women together, and it wasn't permitted by the college. So I was appointed to go and speak to the vice principal about it. And this man was very famous for ragging the students. You know, he would really provoke, and he would treat you like children. But you know, when I went to him and I told him that we wanted to go on this weekend, he said, no, that's out of the question. And I said, sir, we just want to go and visit this church and to, you know, put on a program. He said, why should I let you go? I looked in his eyes I said, we are Christians. I went a little feeling, he dropped his eyes. When I looked in his eyes, he dropped his eyes. He couldn't face my eyes. And when he dropped his eyes, I felt the strength of Christianity. I'm telling you. He just dropped his eyes and he says, okay, you may go. Right? All I said to him is, sir, we are Christians. And he dropped his eyes and he said, you may go. It's interesting that at that time, we were very much involved also in studying the book of Daniel. And I remembered this experience every time I read this. Daniel went into the king and he asked the king for time. And the king knows that this man is not trying to stall for time. He knows that what this man says is integrity and truth. Why? First of all, he has had experience with Daniel, but secondly, I think because Daniel looks him in the face and speaks to him as a man to a man, and he knows that this man is not just stalling for time. This is a person of integrity. There is a difference when you're a Christian. There's a difference when you're not afraid as a Christian, when you stand up and look people in their eyes, and you have the power of God behind you, and you have the power of infinity behind you, and you don't care what answer you're getting. You know what you stand for because you are a child of the Most High. When you take this position, the whole world bends before you.
Amen. Amen.
Indeed, amen. So, Sister Nikki, I see your hand up. I don't know if it was still up or it's again up.
Yes, I just wanted to make a point and ask a question. And also, based on what you said there with Daniel and the king's permission to the time, in chapter 1, where Daniel they were proven for those days. So the king had some encounter with them as well. That even though they didn't eat of his table, they were proven to be wiser than the other wise men. And I wanted to ask as well, when the king made that decree, were any of the wise men killed before Daniel stepped in? Because I'm just wondering, because of Daniel coming in or stopping, asking for time, the other wise men were also preserved from death. I don't know if any were killed before Daniel stepped in. Just want to ask that question.
Yes, I think later in the chapter it says that I think it says that there's something that suggests that they were not executed. But let me see if I can find the exact passage. I don't think I see it here. But the thing is, I think I would understand that first of all they would gather them together, put them in a place, and then execute them. I'm going to suggest that this is how it was. And I don't know. Maybe the rest of them were proven to be fakes, or maybe the king just was so happy he changed his mind. I don't think I see any definite place where it says they were saved. So it's a question I really can't answer, Nikki. All right, but anyway, when you go to
Brother
verse,
David, can I
yes,
join your opinion there? Well, if the decree was that if the wise men did not tell the dream and give the interpretation, all the wise men would be killed. I think if any of the wise men fulfilled that part of the decree, then it would cancel the command to kill all of them. You
okay. I think
understand?
in
So
verse
from a legal
20,
perspective.
verse 24, yeah, it says, then Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. All right, so there's the verse I was looking for. So that kind of settles it then. All right, so they were not executed. So in verse 14, no, actually we're at verse 17. It says, then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven. Now, what strikes me here is that Daniel begins to praise God before he goes to the king. You know, possibly you might think, well, suppose he didn't get the right answer. When a person is in close connection with God, those things never come into your mind. You ask God for something, you get a vision. I don't know how the answer came to Daniel. I don't know if he heard a voice say, Daniel, this is the interpretation. Or maybe he saw the same thing and he was given the understanding, but he knows that it is the right answer. There's no question or no if and but. And when we really talk to God about something, first of all, the first thing we find is rest in our spirits. Whenever I hear that somebody prays, they are in trouble and they pray, and they are still in trouble, I know they have not prayed. They have spoken words, but they have not communicated with God. Well, let me not say they didn't pray. They have not come into the presence of the Lord. When you come into the presence of the Lord, before you get an answer, you are at rest, you're at peace. Because the first thing that happens is that once you speak to God, you know everything is okay. Whatever happens, it's okay. So your answer doesn't become important anymore. What becomes important is that I am connected with him. Wow, everything is okay from this point on. And then after that, the answer can come if it will. But what is most important is that my prayer has brought me into union and communication with my Father, the God of heaven. Then the answer isn't important anymore. I know when Daniel and his friends went to pray, they were in peace and bliss, because it's like when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said to the king, look here, king, do what you want to do. Don't give us any second chance. We don't need a second chance. We don't have to think about it. Our God can deliver us from the furnace. And if he won't, we don't care. I mean, it's mind-blowing that you stand up to him like this. And, you know, it makes me think, because when I think of our timidity, if the police come to lock you or they come to throw you up in jail, or you didn't conform to something, all the stress we go through, I've got to find a lawyer after this, after that. Stress. Because you're wrongfully accused of something. When you compare it to the condition of these people, wow, you can see that trial and difficulty really makes better Christians. Trial and hardship really makes better people for the kingdom. And you can see why God will allow us to go through that great tribulation. So it says Daniel praises God, and he said, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. And he's praising God for what he has seen. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and he raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He's praising God for giving him wisdom. He's praising God for what he has seen in the vision of how God is overthrowing these kingdoms. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Wow, beauty and praise. You can feel Daniel's spirit and joy coming out in that prayer. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret the dream for him. So, Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I have found a man among the exiles of Judah who can tell the king what his dream means.
Arioch taking the credit.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, every time I look at this, I'm thinking, it's interesting the way he puts it. I mean, he starts by saying, I have found. You know, when you listen to the whole story, Arioch didn't find anybody. But it's just an illustration of the way human beings are. Everybody wants to take the credit. And so he finds a way to put himself in the center of the picture. I have found a man who can tell the king what his dream means. And I can see the amazement on Nebuchadnezzar's face. His antennae are up. And he's looking at Daniel with fixity, because Even though Daniel had asked him for the time. Well, I suppose, knowing what he knew about Daniel, he knew that this man is not, what do you call it? In
Fake.
Jamaica,
Fake.
they say, a fake, there's a stronger word.
Sampai.
Huh? In
Sampai.
Jamaica, they say samphire or chikini. But
Unman.
there's another word that doesn't come to me at the moment. But anyway, the king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Now, Daniel is different from the man named Arioch, because look at what he says. Daniel replied, no wise man, no enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in your bed are these. This is why God can trust this man. This is an opportunity for Daniel to become famous and great, to make a name for himself. And so the king comes and says, are you able to tell me? And Daniel makes sure to tell him straight. No wise man, that's Daniel. No enchanter, that's the other men. No magician or diviner, that's the other men, can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But then he gives it straight. There is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Now, I wanted to take a note of this, because as we go to the other chapters, you are going to see that this is something that makes an impact on the mind of Nebuchadnezzar. As we continue to chapter 3 and chapter 4, you will see that this makes a great impact on the mind of Nebuchadnezzar. What Daniel says here, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. So remember, at this point, Nebuchadnezzar is still thinking that there are many gods. There are many gods. But the God Daniel is in touch with is the God who reveals mysteries, or as it says in the King James Version, a God who reveals secrets. This is Nebuchadnezzar's first exposure to the Lord God of heaven, that he's a God who understands secrets and reveals secrets. He has shown to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Then he goes on to tell Nebuchadnezzar the dream. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. Now, the first thing, God not only tells Daniel the dream, but look at how far God goes. He tells Daniel what the king was thinking as he was lying in his bed, the very thought that was in the king's mind. So the king was lying there and he was thinking about what will happen to my kingdom in the future. You must understand that Nebuchadnezzar at that time was king of the greatest political kingdom in the world. Babylon had taken control of the entire biblical world, let me put it that way, because nobody knew about America and Australia and the southern parts of Africa. So we're talking, and maybe a lot of up in the east parts of China and so forth. They were not very well known to the biblical world. But in the biblical world, Babylon had become the greatest nation, and Nebuchadnezzar was king of it. And naturally, these ambitious people, they think about the future and their legacy for generations to come. And so he's lying there and thinking, what will happen to this kingdom of mine, this great kingdom? And you will notice, I'm going to ask you to keep that in mind, because when we come to chapter 3, the same thing is in Nebuchadnezzar's mind. And when you come to chapter 4, the same thing is in Nebuchadnezzar's mind. You can see that the greatest issue before this man is his legacy and his kingdom. And so he's lying there and he's thinking, what will happen to my kingdom after I'm gone? And God uses this opportunity, and he comes to give Nebuchadnezzar the answer. And God functions like this over and over in the Bible. He waits, or he creates an opportunity. He creates a question, then he gives the answer. A question is the perfect opportunity to teach truth. And even as I will tell you, brothers and sisters, even as somebody who is in the school of Christ, I enjoy it when people ask questions, okay? Nobody has to be, well, sometimes if we are short of time and you keep interrupting to ask questions, then it becomes a little painful. But I like questions because questions mean that people are understanding, and so questions are coming because you're understanding. And it gives an opportunity to expand and make it more clear. So I love questions, and I learned that from the Lord, okay? So the Lord uses the opportunity, or he puts the question in Nebuchadnezzar's mind and he tells him. Now Daniel goes on to say, you can see Daniel's humility coming through in verse 30. As for me, where I am concerned, this mystery has not been revealed to me. This mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anybody else alive. Here you can see that the people who become the greatest servants of God, they are the ones who are the most humble people. Daniel doesn't want any credit. He doesn't want the king to think he's smart. He doesn't want the king to think he's wise. I'm not smarter than anybody else, but this has been revealed to me so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Daniel is saying, God gave me this so that you, Mr. King Nebuchadnezzar, might understand the truth about the things that you have asked. The questions you have in your mind, God wanted you to have the answer. Now, I am going to stop at this point, I think, because we are about to look at the vision. I'm just going to look at the vision, and then we'll let the interpretation wait until next week. All right? Because it's going to take more than an hour to go through these thoughts, and we definitely don't have an hour. So I'm going to read the vision. As a matter of fact, let me read it, and then we will look at some images just to cement the picture in our minds. Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze or brass, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. Very straightly said, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will interpret it to the king. So I just want to look at the image very quickly. So Nebuchadnezzar dreamed a dream on his bed. He was thinking what will happen to his kingdom in the future. Daniel came to interpret the dream for him. And this is what Daniel told the king that he saw. So, in a word, what he saw was an image whose head was of pure gold. The breast and the arms were of silver. The belly and the thighs were made of brass. The legs were made of iron, and the feet were made of iron and clay. So the image basically has 5 parts. But the bottom 2, the iron plus the iron and the clay, are basically the same, but it's the same. Feet and legs are a part of the same structure, but it changes a little bit. Something is introduced at the end, which is clay. Clay becomes mingled with the iron. And I think this is the proper way to interpret this vision. Clay becomes mingled with the iron. It's the same iron, but it's mingled with the clay. And if we look at it this way, it harmonizes with all the future prophecies that we will look at. So 4 parts, but 4 parts kind of divided into 5. The last part divided into 2 in a way. So while he's watching, he sees a stone that smites the image on the feet. And it's important that it says, it doesn't say so in the verse we read, but later on it's going to tell you that the stone was cut from a mountain. What we just read, it doesn't say, but later on Daniel will tell you that it was cut from a mountain. So it's interesting that it says that this stone was cut out without hands. It was cut from a mountain, and it was cut without hands. It smote the image, not on the head, not on the breast and arms, not on the belly and the thighs of brass, not on the legs of iron, but on the feet of iron and clay. That is important. Then the stone itself, I don't have an image of this, but the stone became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. But first of all, this image became dust and was carried away by the breeze. But the stone became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So now you can understand why Nebuchadnezzar was so disturbed about this dream. It's a striking dream. And if he had the dream repeatedly, and if it was like real life, you can understand why he was so concerned. Now, most of us are familiar with this prophecy, and we have a good understanding of what it means. But I am pretty certain that as we look at it next week more closely, we will see little things that maybe we never noticed before or we never thought were important. At the very least, if we already have a good understanding, we will be able to review and to strengthen our appreciation of this prophecy. Because we're going to stop here. We have been 1 hour and 10 minutes, and the rest of it will take too long to get into, so we are going to stop here for this evening. Let me pause a little just in case there are any questions, and then we'll have a closing prayer.